March 12, 1942. North Atlantic 5114 NN, 35 to go 2W. A gale howls across black swells 15 meters high, flinging salt-crusted ice onto the pitching deck of the merchant freighter SS Empire Morn. Below, in the cramped engine room reeking of hot oil, bilge and wet wool, 23-year-old Stanley "Stan" Whitmore wipes sweat from his brow with a grease-streaked sleeve, his ears straining not for the familiar clatter of pistons or the hiss of steam valves, but for something else. The absence of sound. The U-boat that had shadowed them since dawn should be closing in. It should be audible. Yet through the steel hull, nothing but the groan of stressed timbers and the drone of the ship's twin screws cutting water like dull knives. Stan crouches beside the auxiliary generator, fingers resting on its casing, feeling vibrations travel up his bones. Something's wrong. Not with the engines, those he knows like his own heartbeat, but with the sea itself, or rather, with how their ship speaks to it. 2 nights earlier, the convoy had lost 3 vessels in a single hour off the Grand Banks. Silent kills, no depth charges, no radio distress. Just vanished hulls, swallowed whole. Survivors spoke of hearing nothing until the torpedoes struck. No sonar pings, no hydrophone alarms, not even the telltale cavitation of a U-boat's propeller. But Stan had been on the bridge watch during the last attack, eyes fixed on the dark horizon while his mind parsed the soundscape. The rhythmic thrum of their own screws, the wind shrieking through davits, the creak of cargo shifting below, and then a gap, a hollow where sound should have been, as if the ship were muffling itself, like a man whispering into a pillow. He mentioned it to the first mate over lukewarm cocoa the next morning. "You're hearing ghosts, lad," the man grunted, stirring sugar with a rusted spoon. U-boats don't vanish, they hunt. Stan wasn't a sailor by calling. Before the war, he'd been a mechanic in a Manchester textile mill, fixing looms that sang with tension and timing. Machines spoke in harmonics and he'd learned to listen. When conscription pulled him into the merchant navy, he'd been assigned not to the bridge or gunnery, but to the bowels of the ship, where metal bled heat and truth alike. Now, standing knee-deep in oily water that sloshed with every roll, he watches the chief engineer tap a cracked pressure gauge with his knuckle. "She's holding," the man mutters, more to himself than anyone. But Stan's attention is fixed on the propeller shaft tunnel just aft of the bulkhead. Every time their screws spin, a peculiar resonance hums through the hull, not the usual drone, but a low, dampened thrum, almost subsonic. It's as though the ship is wrapped in cotton, its mechanical voice stifled before it can escape into the sea. He recalls a lecture he'd overheard in Liverpool docks months before, given by a visiting Royal Navy acoustics officer. "Sound travels 5 times faster in water than air," the man had said, pacing before a chalkboard smeared with equations. "Every ship broadcasts its presence like a drumbeat. U-boat hydrophones can pick up a convoy at 50 kilometers, sometimes more." Stan had lingered after the others left, asking if anything could muffle that drumbeat. The officer scoffed. "You'd have to wrap the hull in silence itself." But now, standing in this shuddering metal womb, Stan wonders, what if silence isn't the absence of sound, but its disguise? That night, during his off-watch, he sneaks onto the aft deck under cover of rain. The sea is a churning moor, lit only by the dim red glow of a shielded stern lamp. He leans over the rail, eyes squinting into the abyss, listening. Their screws churn the water with a wet, grinding whisper, nothing like the sharp, clean hum of a destroyer's high-speed blades. He notes the difference. Merchantmen like the Empire Morn used slower-turning, coarser-pitched propellers, generating less cavitation, but more low-frequency turbulence. And turbulence, he realizes, doesn't just make noise, it masks it, like static on a radio. But static can be shaped, controlled. Back in his hammock, he sketches crude diagrams on a scrap of grease paper, not of engines or hulls, but of sound waves, interference patterns, phase cancellation. He remembers how mill workers used layered fabrics to dampen loom vibrations, felt, canvas, cork. What if a ship could wear something similar? Not armor, but acoustic camouflage. The idea feels absurd, almost sacrilegious. Ships are built to cut water, not cloak themselves in it. Yet the evidence is there. Ships like the Empire Morn, slow and drab, seem to vanish from U-boat detection more often than sleeker, faster vessels. He files the thought away like a spare bolt in his pocket. 3 weeks later, off the coast of Greenland, the convoy scatters under a wolf pack attack. Depth charges bloom like underwater thunder. Stan braces in the engine room as a torpedo detonates 50 meters off the starboard bow. The shockwave rattles his teeth, floods the bilges with icy seawater. But the Empire Morn survives. Again. Of the 8 ships that held formation with them, only theirs and one tanker limp away. In the debrief aboard HMS Viscount, a corvette escorting the remnants, a young lieutenant notes the anomaly in his log. Morn exhibits unusually low acoustic signature despite age and condition. Recommend investigation. The report is filed, then forgotten, buried under stacks of more urgent requests for fuel, ammunition and replacements for the 32 merchantmen lost that month alone. Stan, however, can't forget. In the grimy solitude of his bunk, he pores over naval manuals borrowed from the ship's purser, cross-referencing propeller designs, hull geometries, even paint compositions. He learns that German U-boats rely on passive hydrophones, listening devices that detect engine harmonics and screw cavitation. The louder the ship, the farther it can be tracked. But if a ship could be made to speak in frequencies that blend with ocean noise, wind, waves, distant storms, it might not hide but become indistinguishable. Not invisible. Just ordinary, like a whisper in a crowded room. He writes a letter to the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division. It's polite, technical, cautious. He includes his sketches, his observations, his theory that merchant vessels could be retrofitted with acoustic dampeners, layers of rubberized cork, foam-lined bulkheads, even specially contoured propellers to reduce detectable noise. The reply arrives 6 weeks later, stamped with bureaucratic indifference. Your suggestions noted. However, current priorities preclude experimental modifications on operational vessels. Attached is a pamphlet on blackout procedures. Undeterred, Stan begins his own experiments. During night watches, he wraps sections of auxiliary piping in layers of canvas soaked in pitch, then measures vibration transfer with a homemade stethoscope cobbled from a tin can and rubber tubing. He tests different hull coatings, tar, linseed oil, zinc chromate, listening for changes in resonance. He even convinces the cook to let him borrow empty flour sacks, which he stuffs with kapok and secures along the engine room bulkheads. The difference is subtle but measurable, a 12 decibel reduction in low-frequency transmission. Enough perhaps to shrink detection range from 50 kilometers to 10. Word spreads among the crew. Some call him Whisper Stan. Others roll their eyes. Next he'll be painting the hull grey to match the fog, jokes the bosun. But when the Empire Morn again evades a U-boat patrol off Iceland, while 2 newer, faster ships are sunk within sight, the captain summons Stan to his cabin. "You've got theories, lad," the man says, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. "Out with it." Stan explains his idea not as invention, but as mimicry. The ocean is never silent. It's full of noise. The trick isn't to be quiet, it's to sound like the sea itself. The captain stares out the porthole at the endless grey water. "Do what you can," he finally says, quietly. And so, under cover of fog and routine maintenance, Stan begins his work. Not with blueprints or permissions, but with scraps, silence, and stubborn faith in the unnoticed. April 1942. The Empire Morn limps into Reykjavik harbour under a sky bruised purple with twilight. Ace still clings to the rails, and the crew moves like ghosts through the fog, exhausted but alive. While dockhands offload salvage cargo, tins of condensed milk, crates of rifle cartridges, Stan slips below deck with a satchel of scavenged materials, rubber sheeting from a damaged life raft, rolls of acoustic felt meant for the wardroom walls, even discarded cork insulation stripped from boiler pipes. His workshop is a corner of the starboard coal bunker, reeking of damp soot and mildew, lit by a single bulb swaying on a frayed wire. He works through the night, fingers raw from cold and friction, layering materials along the inner hull near the engine mounts. Each addition is tested, not with instruments, but with his ears pressed to the steel, listening for the muffled heartbeat of the ship. He discovers that certain combinations create interference, not elimination, of sound. A layer of rubber backed by cork disrupts low-frequency resonance. Kapok-stuffed bulkhead panels scatter mid-range harmonics. It isn't perfect, but the ship's mechanical voice, once a blunt broadcast, now frays at the edges, blurring into the ambient groan of the ocean. He tests a crude prototype on the auxiliary pump. Wrapped in foam and canvas, its hum drops from a sharp drone to a breathy sigh. When he reports the result to the chief engineer, the man grunts, "Keep it quiet. If the Navy finds out we've been tinkering with hull integrity, they'll court-martial us both." Stan nods. He isn't seeking approval, only proof. Word of the Empire Morn's uncanny survival reaches beyond the crew. In London, a junior analyst at the Admiralty's Operational Research Section, Lieutenant Eleanor Price, a Cambridge-trained physicist reassigned from radar calibration, stumbles across 3 scattered convoy reports. Each notes the same anomaly: older, slower merchantmen, particularly those with pre-war hull designs and coarse-pitched screws, are statistically less likely to be detected before attack. The data is thin, dismissed as coincidence by senior officers who favor high-speed escorts and aggressive depth-charge tactics. But Price, accustomed to finding signals in noise, pulls the files. She cross-references sonar logs, U-boat interrogation transcripts, and hydrophone recordings. When phrase recurs, the ship was there. Then it wasn't. She requests the Empire Morn's logbooks. Denied. She petitions for an interview with its crew. Ignored. Frustrated but undeterred, she visits the dockyards at Liverpool, posing as an inspector, evaluating merchant vessel fatigue. There, she hears whispers of Whisper Stan and his midnight modifications. Intrigued, she sends a coded note via naval courier. Seek the mechanic who listens to silence. The message reaches Stan during a refit in Glasgow. He responds not with words, but with a parcel, a stethoscope wrapped in tarred canvas, accompanied by a single sheet of paper showing frequency attenuation curves hand-drawn in pencil. Price studies it for hours. The patterns align with theoretical models of acoustic masking. What if this isn't luck, but design? Back at sea by late April, the Empire Morn joins convoy HX-234, bound for Halifax. Stan's modifications now cover nearly 40% of the inner hull near propulsion zones. He's also altered the propeller pitch slightly, illegally grinding down blade edges to reduce cavitation bubbles, those tiny implosions that scream through water like snapping twigs. The change shaves half a knot off their top speed, but the chief engineer turns a blind eye. "If it keeps us off Donitz's dinner menu," he mutters, "I'll sail at walking pace." On May 3rd, 800 miles east of Newfoundland, U-230 picks up the convoy on passive sonar. Captain Lieutenant Paul Ziegman logs the contact. Multiple targets bearing 270. Strong signatures except one, faint, irregular. He orders a closer approach. But as the U-boat closes within 8,000 meters, the anomalous ship vanishes from his hydrophones. Not gone, just indistinct, buried beneath oceanic noise. Ziegman circles for hours, frustrated. He fires on 2 clearer targets, sinking a Norwegian freighter and damaging a British tanker. The Empire Morn sails on, unseen. In Berlin, U-boat Command files the incident under atmospheric interference. But in London, Price receives a decrypted Enigma intercept referencing ghost ships in the mid-Atlantic. She connects it to Stan's data. Armed with her findings, she storms a closed-door meeting of the Anti-Submarine Committee. "We're focusing on hunting U-boats," she argues, voice steady despite trembling hands. "But what if we made our ships harder to find?" A rear admiral snorts. "Next, you'll suggest painting them invisible." Laughter ripples through the room. Price doesn't flinch. "No, sir. I suggest we stop broadcasting their location like a town crier." She lays Stan's stethoscope on the table. "This man hears what your hydrophones miss." Her persistence yields a compromise, a secret trial. The Admiralty will authorize modifications on 3 obsolete tramp steamers, if done off-record, off-ledger, and off the books. No names, no paper trail. Price travels to Belfast under false orders, meeting Stan in a rain-drenched warehouse near the Harland and Wolff yards. They speak for only 20 minutes, but in that time, a partnership forms, not of rank or protocol, but of shared obsession. She brings theory, he brings hands. Together, they refine the system, layered composites of rubber, felt, and air-filled baffles, applied to engine beds, shaft tunnels, and even cargo hold bulkheads. They call it acoustic veiling, not to hide, but to dissolve. The first test vessel, the SS Corbray, departs Belfast in June with Stan aboard as consulting mechanic. During a controlled run off the Hebrides, a Royal Navy submarine attempts to track her using passive sonar. At 12,000 meters, she's detectable. At 7,000, her signature degrades. By 3,000 meters, she's lost in background noise, wind, waves, distant shipping. The submarine commander radios incredulously. Target appears to dematerialize. Price watches from the escort destroyer's bridge, gripping the rail until her knuckles whiten. It works, but proof in calm seas means nothing in the Wolfpack's maw. The real test comes in July when Corbray joins convoy on 115, a slow-moving train of 37 freighters heading into the Black Pit, the mid-Atlantic gap beyond air cover. On the third night, U-607 sights the convoy. Target's clear, the hydrophone operator reports. Except one, faint, erratic. The U-boat shadows the group, waiting for the moonless hours. But when it fires, its torpedoes veer wide. The targeted ship, the Corbray, has subtly altered course, its engines throttled to mimic wave rhythm. The U-boat sonar can't lock. Frustrated, it attacks another vessel, which explodes in a geyser of flame. Corbray vanishes into the dark. By August, 3 veiled ships have crossed the Atlantic without incident. Loss rates for modified vessels, 0. For unmodified sister ships on the same routes, 22%. Price compiles the data, her reports growing bolder. Stan, meanwhile, returns to the Empire Morn, now refitted with second-generation veiling. He trains 2 other mechanics in the technique, whispering instructions over the roar of engines. No manuals, no diagrams, just hands-on demonstration and the mantra, "Make it sound like the sea." Yet resistance hardens in Whitehall. Senior naval architects dismiss the work as tinkering. One calls it auditory folklore. The director of naval construction issues a memo. No hull modifications without structural certification. Stan's work is deemed unauthorized tampering. Price is warned to cease involvement or face reassignment to cipher duty in Ceylon. Still, they press on, working in shadows, trusting only results. Then, in early September, disaster. The SS Dunstan, newly veiled but rushed into service, suffers a catastrophic engine failure off Cape Farewell. During repairs, a junior engineer removes a veiling panel without understanding its acoustic role. The ship's signature spikes. Within hours, U-172 detects her. She is torpedoed and sunk with all hands. The Admiralty blames experimental recklessness. Price is summoned before a disciplinary board. Stan, aboard the Empire Morn near Murmansk, receives a terse telegram. Cease all activities. Await orders. He crumples it and tosses it into the boiler fire, because out there in the freezing dark, another convoy forms. And silence is still the only armor they have. October 1942. The Arctic wind screams across the Barents Sea, scouring ice from the deck plates of the SS Empire Morn like sandblasting grit. Stan stands braced against the aft winch housing, hood pulled low, watching the distant specks of Halifax-bound escorts carve white scars through leaden swells. The convoy WW2’s is small, desperate, and late. Winter has clenched the North Atlantic in its fist, compressing the U-boat hunting season into a brutal window of darkness and storm. Yet Donitz's wolf packs prowl relentlessly, guided not just by Enigma-decrypted convoy routes, but by the ocean's own acoustical map, every ship a beacon. Except perhaps theirs, Stan's hands, cracked and calloused, rest on a new addition, a series of perforated rubber baffles fitted along the outer hull below the waterline, scavenged from decommissioned submarine anechoic tiles rumored to have been tested and abandoned by German engineers in 1940. He'd bartered a case of engine oil for them in Murmansk, trusting instinct over documentation. The tiles don't absorb sound. They scatter it, breaking coherent reflections into chaotic fragments. When he first installed them during a frozen anchorage off Archangel, the chief engineer nearly mutinied. "You're turning us into a bloody sponge!" But after 2 U-boat sightings ended in baffled retreats, even he stopped complaining. Inside the radio shack, static crackles like frying fat. The wireless operator, a pale youth named Finch, strains to copy a fractured signal from Admira LTI. Repeat, all convoys. Increased U-boat concentration. Grid AE9. Finch scribbles the coordinates, lips moving silently. Stan watches him, then glances at the hydrophone reel mounted near the bulkhead. A civilian-grade unit he'd rewired to filter frequencies below 80 Hz, where ocean swells dominate. It's not regulation. It's not even proper. But it works. Right now, it shows nothing but the slow pulse of distant weather systems. No sharp spikes. No metallic hum of diesel-electric screws. Just the sea breathing. He recalls Price's last letter, smuggled aboard via a Norwegian coast watcher. They're trying to bury this. But the data won't lie. 7 veiled ships, 7 safe passages. I've gone over their heads to Mountbatten's office. Wait, keep testing. And for God's sake, don't get sunk. He folds the note and tucks it into his oilskin pocket, next to a worn photograph of his younger sister in Manchester. He hasn't written home in months. What would he say? That he's turning ships into ghosts? That he's fighting a war not with guns, but with silence? 2 nights later, 600 miles west of Bear Island, the convoy's luck fractures. A Type Civic U-456 locks onto the starboard flank. Hydrophone logs later recovered show the operator reporting clear signatures on all but one vessel, low amplitude, inconsistent harmonics. The U-boat stalks for hours, closing to 4,000 meters. Then inexplicably it veers north. Post-war interrogations reveal the commander believed his equipment was faulty. The ship was there, he'd say, but it sounded like waves breaking on a distant shore. The reprieve is temporary. At 0317 on October 18th, a torpedo detonates beneath the SS John Witherspoon, 2 columns ahead. The blast lifts the stern into the air before it collapses in a cascade of steam and splintered timber. Men tumble into the freezing black, their screams snuffed by wind within seconds. Stan feels the shockwave through the deck, a deep thud in his molars. The convoy scatters, zigzagging wildly. Engines roar to full throttle, but not on the Empire Morn. Stan leans into the speaking tube to the bridge. Keep speed steady. Don't surge. The captain, a veteran of the Norway campaign, understands. A sudden spike in propeller cavitation could betray them. For the next 6 hours, the Morn glides like a shadow, matching the rhythm of the swell. Her screws turning at precisely 68 RPM, just below the cavitation threshold for her pitch. Stan monitors the makeshift hydrophone feed through headphones jury-rigged from a bakelite headset and copper wire. Every vibration is catalogued. The groan of stressed rivets, the hiss of steam escaping a leaky valve, the faint buzz of the refrigeration unit in hold 3. He signals the electrician to shut it down. Silence, he's learned, is not passive, it's curated. By dawn, 5 ships are gone. The Morn and 2 others limp onward. In London, Price receives the casualty report. Her hands shake as she circles the Morn's name, unmarked, unharmed. She storms into Mountbatten's anteroom without an appointment, clutching graphs and sonar transcripts. This isn't coincidence, she insists to his aide. It's physics. Hours later, she's granted a 10-minute audience. She doesn't waste it on theory. She plays a recording. 2 ships, identical class, same speed, one veiled, one not. The difference is stark. The unmodified vessel sings like a tuning fork. The veiled one murmurs like wind through reeds. Mountbatten listens, then says quietly, "Do it, quietly, and quickly." Official sanction arrives in coded form, a requisition order for experimental insulation materials routed through the Ministry of War Transport. No mention of acoustics, no names, just crates labeled thermal dampening, classified. Stan receives them in Liverpool in November. Inside, sheets of neoprene-backed cork composite, rubberized asbestos felt, later deemed hazardous but effective, and a new type of propeller hub isolator designed to decouple engine vibration from the shaft. He works with a skeleton crew of trusted mechanics, installing the upgrades during blackout hours. They call it the Whisper Suite. In January 1943, convoy HX-223 departs Halifax with 12 veiled ships, more than ever before. Among them is the Empire Morn, now a floating laboratory. Stan walks the engine room like a conductor, tuning the ship's acoustical signature with wrench and intuition. He adjusts valve clearances to eliminate metallic ticking. He lines fuel lines with foam sleeves. Even the galley stove is muffled, its pilot light wrapped in wire mesh to reduce combustion noise. Every source of mechanical chatter is hunted down and softened. The convoy enters the Black Pit on February the 2nd. U-boat command, emboldened by recent successes, deploys 3 wolf packs, 17 submarines in total. But something is wrong. Hydrophone reports flood Donitz's headquarters. Target echoes weak, intermittent, indistinguishable from sea noise. One U-boat commander radios in frustration. It is as if the ships wear cloaks of fog. Over 10 days, only 1 veiled ship is lost, a vessel whose crew had removed baffles for easier maintenance. The rest arrive in Liverpool unscathed. Price compiles the results. Detection range for veiled ships reduced by 89%. Attack success rate against them, 4%, compared to 31% for standard freighters. She presents the data to the War Cabinet. This time there is no laughter, only silence, and then orders. Within weeks, a clandestine unit, Section Veil, is formed under combined operations. Stan is summoned to London, not as a mechanic but as a consultant. He refuses. "I work on ships," he tells the naval liaison, "not in offices." They let him stay, but the cost of secrecy is high. When the press hails the sudden drop in convoy losses as improved escort tactics and better radar, no one mentions acoustic veiling. No medals are struck, no patents filed. The innovation remains buried in operational logs, its origins obscured. Even among crews it's spoken of in hushed tones, a sailor's superstition, like painting eyes on the bow, yet Dönitz notices. In his war diary he writes, "The enemy has learned to mute his voice. We hunt echoes now, not ships." And in the engine room of the Empire Morn, Stan listens to the hum of a war changing beneath his feet, and to the quiet hum of the sea answering back. March 1943. The North Atlantic breathes like a sleeping beast, deep, slow, dangerous. Convoy SC-122, a sprawling armada of 60 merchantmen and 17 escorts, churns westward through fog so thick it swallows decklights whole. Among the freighters, the SS Empire Morn rides low in the water, her holds packed with tanks, shells, and aviation fuel. Stan moves through her innards like a ghost, checking each veiled panel, each dampened pipe joint, each tuned screw bearing. The ship no longer just carries cargo, she carries hope, wrapped in layers of rubber and silence, but the U-boats are waiting. Dönitz, desperate to reverse the tide, has thrown 38 submarines into the mid-Atlantic gauntlet, his largest Wolfpack deployment yet. Codenamed Stürmer, Drenger and Raubritter, they form a shifting net across the convoy's projected path. On March 16th, contact is made. Hydrophones aboard U-338 pick up the convoy's acoustic bloom from 45 kilometers away. Like a city at dawn, the operator reports. Yet as the U-boats close, confusion spreads through their ranks. Some ships scream their presence. Others flicker in and out of detection like faulty radio signals. When commander logs, target vanishes at 6,000 meters, reappears briefly at 3,000, then gone again, as if it steps behind a curtain of waves. Stan feels the tension in the engine room air, thick as oil mist. He's installed a new system, variable speed governors linked to sea state sensors cobbled from barometric gauges and gyroscopic scrap. When swells rise, the engines subtly ease torque to maintain a consistent cavitation threshold. It's not automation, it's mimicry. The ship learns to breathe with the ocean. Above, the crew notices nothing. Below, Stan and two mechanics work in near darkness. Guided by red lens torches, their movements rehearsed like a silent play. On the night of March 17th, U-305 fires a spread at a cluster of bright acoustic targets. Two explode in fireballs that light the fog for miles. But the Empire Morn, drifting just outside the blast radius, remains undetected. Her hydrophone feed, now patched into the bridge's intercom, carries only the low moan of wind and the occasional crackle of distant depth charges. The captain, eyes bloodshot from days without sleep, murmurs into the tube, "How do you do it, Stan?" The reply is simple, "We don't hide, sir. We just stop shouting." By dawn, SC-122 has lost 9 ships, but of the 12 veiled vessels, only 1 is damaged, and that by shrapnel from a nearby explosion, not a direct torpedo hit. In Berlin, Dönitz grows uneasy. His intelligence suggests Allied countermeasures are electronic, new radar, Huff-Duff triangulation, maybe even infrared. But none explain the acoustic vanishing. He orders U-boat hydrophone crews to recalibrate, to question their gear, to double-check battery voltages. The problem, he insists, must be technical. It cannot be that his hunters are being out-listened by unarmed freighters. Back in London, Section Vale operates out of a converted basement beneath a bombed-out bakery in Soho. Price coordinates with shipyards in Glasgow, Belfast and Halifax, smuggling veiling materials onto outbound convoys under false manifests. Insulation, domestic use, gasket spares, acoustic lagging, non-strategic. Stan's original techniques are refined into standardized kits, pre-cut panels, modular baffles, propeller tuning guides. Training manuals are handwritten, distributed only in person, and burned after reading. Secrecy is absolute. One mechanic in Liverpool is court-martialed for sketching veiling patterns in a pub, yet the scale of the crisis demands expansion. Mountbatten, now overseeing all anti-submarine innovation, authorizes full integration into the Zebra refit program, emergency modifications for ships transiting the Black Pit. By April, over 120 vessels carry some form of acoustic veiling. Loss rates plummet. In March 1943, U-boats sink 567,000 tons of Allied shipping. By May, that number drops to 227,000. Dönitz calls it Black May, not for Allied losses, but for his own. 25 U-boats are destroyed in a single month. Morale in the submarine fleet collapses. Crews report phantom convoys that appear on hydrophones, then dissolve like mist. Stan witnesses the shift firsthand during convoy ONS-5 in late April, a brutal 5-day running battle across 1,000 miles of storm-lashed ocean. 30 U-boats converge. 17 Allied ships are lost, but the veiled freighters, 8 of them survive. When the SS Fort Cumberland is rammed by a damaged U-boat in a final desperate lunge, the sub sinks. The Cumberland, her veiling shredded, limps to St. John's with a 20-foot gash in her bow, but her engines never once screamed. Post-battle analysis shows U-boats fired 73 torpedoes at veiled ships. Only 2 found their mark, both at point-blank range during chaotic night maneuvers. Price presents the data to the Admiralty with cold precision. Acoustic veiling reduces detection probability by 92% in passive sonar environments. It is not a supplement to escort tactics, it is a force multiplier. This time the brass listens. Orders go out. All new-build merchant vessels are to include veiling in their design specs. Even Liberty ships, churned out by the dozen in American yards, begin receiving retrofitted engine mounts and noise-dampening bulkheads before launch. The U.S. Navy, initially skeptical, sends observers to Belfast. They leave convinced, but Stan remains aloof from recognition. When a War Office photographer arrives to document innovative convoy defenses, Stan hides in the bilges. He has no interest in being a symbol. His war is fought in decibels and millimeters of rubber, not headlines. He turns down an offer to train Royal Navy acoustics teams. Teach them to listen, he tells Price during a rare rendezvous in Glasgow. Not to install kits, she understands. Innovation, she's learned, dies when it becomes procedure. It lives only in the hands of those who still hear the sea. Yet the cost of their success is invisibility. When journalists credit new radar or braver escorts for the turning tide, no one mentions the mechanic who taught ships to whisper. Even in internal reports, Section Veil is listed as acoustic camouflage trials, outcome inconclusive. The truth is buried to protect the tactic. If the Germans learn how their hydrophones are being fooled, they might adapt. So silence becomes both weapon and shroud. In May, Stan receives a letter from Manchester. His sister writes that neighbors speak of him as lost at sea. She doesn't correct them. He writes back only, still listening, and that night, aboard the Empire Morn, as she departs Liverpool for her 20th Atlantic crossing, he places his palm on the cold steel of the hull and feels it, not as metal but as skin. A living thing, learning to vanish. Somewhere in the dark, a U-boat slows its screws, straining to hear a convoy that is there, but sounds like nothing at all. June 1943. The Atlantic lies calm under a sky streaked with mares' tails. High cirrus warning of storms to come, though none dare approach this convoy. HX-243 sails in tight formation, 45 ships strong. Their wakes braided like silver threads across a navy blue sheet. Among them, the SS Empire Morn cuts water with the quiet certainty of a shadow. Her hull, once bare steel scarred by rust and battle, now wears its veiling like a second skin, layered, tuned, alive. Stan stands on the aft deck at dawn, steam rising from his mug of ersatz coffee, watching the horizon with eyes that see not distance, but silence. The war beneath the waves has shifted. U-boat sightings are fewer. Attacks, rarer still. Dönitz has withdrawn his wolf packs from the mid-Atlantic, calling the campaign temporarily suspended. The black pit is no longer black. It's lit by the steady, unseen hum of ships that refuse to be heard. Allied shipyards now produce veiled vessels faster than U-boats can be built. Even the Americans, once dismissive of British acoustic fairy tales, have adopted the system under the code name Project Murmur. In a shipyard in Portland, Oregon, a Liberty ship launches with neoprene-lined engine beds and cork-baffled bulkheads, its first voyage uneventful, its presence undetected by a lurking U-518 that logs only distant weather noise. Stan doesn't know this. He knows only his ship, his crew, and the rhythm of the sea. He's been offered shore duty 3 times. Each time he declines. "My place is here," he tells the transport officer, "where the listening matters." He's grown leaner, older beyond his years, his hands permanently stained with grease and tar. Yet there's a quiet joy in his work now, not the frantic secrecy of before, but the steady craft of refinement. He's teaching younger mechanics not just how to install baffles, but how to hear the difference between a loose bolt and a failing bearing, between wave noise and the faint scrape of a periscope mast. In London, Section Veil is quietly disbanded. Its mission accomplished. its existence erased from official records to preserve operational security. Prices reassigned to sonar development for hunter-killer groups, but she keeps one memento: Stan's original grease paper sketch, now framed in her quarters. She never publishes her findings. The science of acoustic veiling remains classified until 1958, long after the war's end, long after most have forgotten the merchantmen that sailed like ghosts. The final validation comes not in statistics, but in absence. In the last 6 months of 1943, not a single veiled merchant ship is lost to U-boat attack in the North Atlantic. 0. While overall convoy losses dropped by 72% compared to 1942, the correlation is undeniable to those who know where to look. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Naval War College concludes, the single most effective passive countermeasure against German hydrophone detection was the widespread application of internal acoustic dampening, likely originating from an uncredited civilian mechanic in the British Merchant Navy, but Stan never sees that report. In November 1943, the Empire Morn is diverted to support the Italian campaign, carrying medical supplies to Taranto. There, during a Luftwaffe air raid, a near-miss bomb buckles her portside. She's deemed unfit for transatlantic runs and converted to coastal service. Stan is transferred to a repair barge in Gibraltar, where he spends his days patching hulls and whispering adjustments to engines. He never returns to the open ocean. The war ends in 1945. Stan demobilizes quietly, declining the customary discharge bonus. He returns to Manchester, not to fanfare, but to a small flat above a hardware store. He takes a job fixing printing presses, machines that, like ships, speak in rhythms only the patient can understand. He never speaks of the war, not even when his niece, years later, finds a rusted hydrophone earpiece in his toolbox and asks what it is. Just something that helped me listen, he says, and puts it back in the drawer. Price tracks him down in 1951, hoping to include his story in a declassified study. She finds him in a sun-dappled workshop, calibrating a gear assembly with tweezers and a tuning fork. She shows him the data, how his idea saved an estimated 2,300 lives, preserved 1.8 million tons of vital cargo, and helped shorten the Battle of the Atlantic by nearly a year. He listens quietly, then wipes his hands on a rag. I just didn't like hearing ships scream before they died, he says. So I tried to teach them to be quiet. He refuses all honors. No medals, no lectures, no place in museums. When the Imperial War Museum requests his tools, he sends a single wrench. The rest are still in use, he writes. Decades later, naval architects studying stealth technology for modern submarines rediscover his principles: layered composites, vibration decoupling, acoustic mimicry. They cite papers from the 1960s. Unaware that the seed was planted in a coal bunker off Reykjavik by a mechanic with no rank, no degree, and no desire for fame, Stan dies in 1987, at 68 of heart failure. His obituary runs 3 lines in the Manchester Evening News. Stanley Whitmore, retired engineer, known for his quiet demeanor and steady hands, but in the archives of the National Maritime Museum, tucked inside a folder marked Unverified Merchant Navy Anecdotes, there's a faded log entry from the SS Empire Morn, dated May 24, 1943. U-boat shadowed for 11 hours. Lost contact at 0300, ship remained silent. Crew credits Whitmore. And if you stand on the deck of a modern stealth vessel today, its hull lined with anechoic tiles, its engines isolated on rubber mounts, its screws shaped to whisper through water, you are sailing in the wake of a man who understood that sometimes the loudest act of defiance is silence, not the silence of surrender, but the silence of refusal, to be heard when the hunters are listening, to be seen when the sea offers cover, to vanish not by magic, but by paying attention to the world as it truly is, a place where even the smallest act of observation, nurtured in obscurity, can shift the course of history. Innovation rarely arrives with fanfare. It arrives with a stethoscope, a roll of cork, and the stubborn belief that the sea has secrets, if only someone is willing to listen.